Ethan had always taken the 10:45 p.m. train home from work, a routine he found comforting after long days in the office. That night, however, he had to stay late to finish a critical project. By the time he left, it was nearly midnight. He hurried to the station, barely catching the last train of the night. As he stepped onto the train, he noticed something peculiar. The usually crowded carriages were almost empty, save for a few passengers scattered throughout. Ethan chose a seat near the middle of the carriage and settled in, pulling out his book to pass the time. The train began its journey with a familiar rumble. Ethan glanced around, feeling an unusual chill in the air. The few other passengers seemed strangely distant, their faces obscured by shadows. He shrugged off the unease and focused on his book, hoping to immerse himself in the fictional world. After a few minutes, Ethan looked up to see that the train had entered a tunnel. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. When the lights stabilized, he noticed something alarming. The train seemed to be moving in the wrong direction. He was sure he knew the route by heart, and this wasn't it. Ethan stood up, intending to find a conductor and ask what was going on. As he made his way through the carriages, he realized something even more unsettling. The train was eerily silent. The usual hum of conversation and the clatter of wheels on tracks were absent. It was as if he were the only living soul on board. He finally reached the conductor's compartment and knocked on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, harder this time, but still received no response. Frustrated and growing more anxious, Ethan tried the door, but it was locked. Suddenly, the train's lights went out completely, plunging him into darkness. He fumbled for his phone to use its flashlight, but the battery was dead. Just as he was about to panic, the lights flickered back on, but the scene that greeted him was beyond his worst nightmares. The once empty seats were now occupied by ghostly figures, their faces pale and eyes hollow. They stared at him with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he backed away, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. One of the figures, a woman in an old-fashioned dress, stood up and began to approach him. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she were moving through water. Ethan turned and ran, darting through the carriages in a desperate bid to escape. But no matter how far he ran, the train seemed endless, the ghostly passengers watching him with silent, accusing eyes. The woman continued to follow him, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. "Help us," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with anguish. "Release us." Ethan stumbled, falling to his knees. "What do you want from me?" he cried out, his voice echoing in the empty carriage. "You must help us," the woman repeated, her eyes filled with sorrow. "We are trapped here, bound to this train by a curse. You are our only hope." Desperate and terrified, Ethan tried to understand. "How? How can I help you?" The woman extended a translucent hand, pointing to a small, dusty book lying on one of the seats. "The conductor's journal. It holds the key to breaking the curse." Ethan grabbed the journal and flipped it open, his hands trembling. The pages were filled with the conductor's meticulous notes about the train's operations, but also with entries about strange occurrences and sightings. As he read, a horrifying story unfolded. Years ago, the train had been involved in a terrible accident, derailing in the middle of the night and plunging into a ravine. Most of the passengers had died instantly, but their souls remained bound to the train, unable to move on. The conductor, racked with guilt, had tried to atone for his mistakes, but had ultimately failed, and his spirit had cursed the train to forever roam the tracks, never reaching its destination. Ethan's breath quickened as he realized what he had to do. He needed to find the conductor's spirit and perform a ritual described in the journal to break the curse. With the ghostly passengers watching him intently, he made his way to the front of the train. In the conductor's compartment, Ethan found the ghost of the conductor, a weary, sorrowful figure hunched over the controls. The air was thick with despair. The conductor looked up as Ethan entered, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and regret. "Are you here to end this?" the conductor asked, his voice a mere whisper. Ethan nodded, holding up the journal. "I know what I need to do." The conductor's ghost guided Ethan through the ritual, their combined voices chanting the ancient words. As they completed the final incantation, the train shuddered violently. The ghostly passengers began to fade, their expressions of torment slowly giving way to peace. The conductor smiled sadly at Ethan. "Thank you. You have set us free." Carriages silent and still. Ethan walked away from the platform, the weight of his experience settling on his shoulders. He knew he had done something profound, something that would stay with him forever. As he made his way home, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief and gratitude. The nightmare was over, but the memory of that fateful midnight train ride would haunt him for the rest of his days.